Hi, my name is Lisa Kasmer. Technically, it's Dr. Lisa Kasmer. I have degrees from Northwestern, the University of Virginia, and finally a PhD from Rutgers University in New Jersey. I have a PhD in modern European history, and my discussion today is about one of the gravest issues I have with the misuse of history by people who essentially misrepresent the truth for their own ideological political ends. This has nothing to do with actually my own politics because, above all, I value what is legitimate and honest about my profession. And anytime I have lectured a class, and if anybody found any students that I ever taught, they would find out that on day one, I tell them I endeavor to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, because it is not only what I am charged with doing, I consider it a kind of sacred task, if you will. At any rate, my topic today is about the big lie, if you will, that's floating around that speaks of Adolf Hitler as if he is some sort of leftist, or that National Socialism was somehow socialist and not a name that was a dodge, which is what it really was. And I'm going to go into a lot of detail as to why this is so. Okay, let's start with a little bit of background here. Adolf Hitler was a veteran of the First World War, with some distinguishment. People considered what he did significant enough that him being a veteran was highly respected. Okay. But in 1923, he organized a revolt against the Weimar Republic, the government that was established essentially through Germany's loss, the extinguishment of the office of Kaiser, which was head of state, kind of like a king. And once Wilhelm II left, there was this new government established. And it struggled to gain some kind of legitimacy. So there were a number of people sympathetic to what Hitler organized, which was called the Beer Hall Putsch in 1923. It was squashed. He was jailed, but not for very long, and maybe just enough to write Mein Kampf, really, which laid out his vision of a pure German race, and essentially finding it convenient to scapegoat non-pure Germans as to why Germany lost in the first place. So once you have that kind of scapegoating going on, and this is something that's repeated throughout history, whether you're going to scapegoat someone by race, religion, nationality, something, whatever, gender, whatever it is, sexual orientation, it doesn't matter. There always is some group of people that's going to be identified and made to bear blame for something they have nothing to do with. This is almost a universal truth, and historians actually rarely talk about universal truths. I think there are very few, like war is expensive and don't invade Russia in the winter. That's about the few that we can talk about. At any rate, after Hitler was released from prison, he slowly built a political movement. And he built it with essentially a kind of, if you want to call them thuggish, maybe, essay, might be a particularly appropriate term, to intimidate people. That was certainly a part of the movement, and certainly was part of Mussolini's movement as well, by the way. So finally, there's after much problems that occur in Germany owing to a couple of reasons. One was the death of the only legitimately popular figure in Weimar, Germany, which was Gustav Stresemann. He died. There was a great crash, as everyone knows, on Wall Street in 1929, put the world into a global depression. Hitler's got all the answers, apparently, or so he says, because it's those people's fault. Giving Social Security to old ladies, that's why, there are problems. Something like that. Let's pick on pensioners or some other group and say, it's their fault, rather than looking at structurally what's happening and who, in fact, might be worthy of blame. Okay. Hitler runs for president in 1932. There's a runoff. There is a tremendous fracturing of many, many political parties, including ones very much that you would call far left, true socialists, which meant the abolition of private property, or communists that were allies of Lenin, Stalin, Trotsky, whoever. And then you have the authoritarian type on the right that would include conservatives like Paul von Hindenburg, as well as National Socialists like Adolf Hitler. Sometimes the far left and the far right, some people think they're the same, but there are differences. You can pull them apart. If you look at details, you can actually label what the sameness is and what the differences are. And I hope that the rest of what I talk about will, in fact, do this. Okay. He runs for president. Hitler versus Paul von Hindenburg. And yes, it's the guy that the Hindenburg, the blimp, if you will, the Zeppelin that blew up, essentially, whatever you want to call it. Same guy. Paul von Hindenburg wins. The reason why he wins is not because his party did better in the general elections for the Reichstag. It had nothing to do with that, or the Bundestag, whatever you want to call it at that point. It had to do with the fact that everybody who was not a National Socialist said Paul von Hindenburg is the lesser of two evils. We'll vote for him. At least he's not Hitler. We'll vote for him. We'll vote for him. We'll vote for him. So Paul von Hindenburg won. What those who voted for Hindenburg didn't expect was that in January of 1933, in some ways influenced by various people, a grandson had some role in this, political operatives who suggested that Hitler would help conservatives become more popular. They could control him somehow. Through all of that, Paul von Hindenburg turns around and names him chancellor. So the president essentially was an equivalent of a Kaiser, a type of ruler. And the chancellor is basically the equivalent of a prime minister who actually runs the day-to-day operations of government. So the people who were trying to avoid Hitler ended up having Hitler running government anyway. After that, very shortly after, there was something called the Reichstag fire. And it created a panic, much like 9/11 created a great panic, or the rise of ISIS or some other event can create widespread fear. And this Reichstag fire, which some truly believe was set by the Nazis themselves. I have never taken a total stand on yes or no. I think it's highly possible, but I don't know whose hands are dirty. I don't know who ordered it. I don't know who actually carried it out. So because I'm not clear on those points, I back off saying they definitely said it. They probably did. It's very likely. But we'll keep it at that. You can look it up and make your own judgment on that matter. At any rate, the Reichstag fire proved to be the perfect opportunity for Hitler to go to his legislative body and basically ask them to pass something called the Enabling Act, which was passed in March of 1933. It gave Hitler virtual dictatorial powers. They freely gave this to him. So it's like the product of an election, that you can't say that he took over the country exactly. It's not quite the same to say that he was freely elected, because he wasn't. His party did very well overall in the 32 elections, but he did not win personally the presidency himself. So it's a little either or 6 or 1 half dozen and the other. But nonetheless, this wasn't done by a military coup or anything like that. It was done through the process of electing a government. So in that, even if there is some form of intimidation involved, you have to see it as somehow legitimate. Now, what does Hitler do with this power? He does a number of things. One of which is he bans the parties of those who were against him, and that concludes any kind of socialist or communist party. Why would he do that if he's a socialist? Wouldn't he want them as his allies? Why would a conservative who's kind of an authoritarian actually name him as chancellor if he's some sort of socialist? Doesn't actually compute. Okay. He not only bans those parties, he puts the leaders of them in jail. Again, this fact doesn't compute with the off-made theory that somehow he's a socialist. Why is he getting rid of those parties? Why is he jailing these leaders? They were the early versions of concentration camps, essentially, that he was sending political prisoners to. Okay. The only person who could stop him was Paul von Hindenburg, who was the president, remember, and he is the chancellor. Well, Paul von Hindenburg dies in 1934. There's nobody left to stop him. He can do what he wants because he's in charge. He's been given dictatorial powers via the Enabling Act. Basically, this is how one talks about the rise of the Third Reich, because it's not the Weimar government anymore. It's not freely elected. Okay, so not only does he have this power, what he also does is he sees that he no longer needs to have any kind of conceit that he cared anything about workers. Workers basically belonged to the state. There were no unions. There was no one to negotiate wages, working conditions, anything like that. That's gone. And anyone who thought this was bad, anyone who might want to talk about the rights of workers who were members of the SA, they were eliminated. Google something called the Night of Long Knives, 1934. And you will see that the purge was a way of getting rid of any kind of idea or concept or conceit, any type of influence, that there was any interest in promoting the prosperity and well-being of German workers. Why did he do it? Well, it's kind of laid out even beforehand. People who backed Hitler up until that point, and of course afterwards, were business interests, bankers, corporations, not only in Germany, but outside of Germany. You can Google Prescott Bush, the grandfather of George W. Bush and Jeb Bush, and the father of George Herbert Walker Bush. And you will see that, indeed, people who actually wanted to get rid of Franklin Delano Roosevelt looked at Hitler as a kind of model. So, this, again, how can you talk about Hitler as a socialist given his allies and given who he has made his enemy, who he's identified as an enemy, and who he's gotten rid of? Doesn't make sense. Doesn't compute. If you're thinking about it, the facts don't add up to support that theory or that notion or that politically charged myth. It's just not factual. Okay. So, beyond that, you can talk about the making of German Jews non-citizens. You can talk about marriages between Germans and Jews being forcibly separated and broken up. You can talk about women who are Jewish being forcibly sterilized or forced to have abortions. Meanwhile, women who were purely German could not obtain birth control. It was illegal for them. Abortion was illegal for them. So the German state was deciding who should procreate and who should not. It's control of people, which is a very authoritarian concept, frankly. Now, you go after that. Oh, and by the way, if you want to look up someone who has done a lot of research on that, either Claudia Kuntz, which is spelled with K, Kootz, I believe, Kuntz, or Gisela Bach. Both of those women have done a lot of work on what Hitler's regime did to women, whether it was pro-life or anti-life. And it all depended on whether or not you were German or whether you were Jewish. So, finally, and clearly this is not something that a socialist of any stripe is going to support. I don't think you can equate taking matters of marriage and bearing children and making decisions for people as the same as providing free college. That doesn't make sense. One certainly promotes the improvement of all people and an investment in a country's prosperity as a whole, and the other is making very specific decisions about specific people for their own arbitrary purposes. That's why it's not the same. Later on, you can talk about why the only people who supported Generalissimo Franco in Spain against a freely elected socialist government was Hitler and Mussolini. The conservatives of other governments, they didn't want to know anything about it. They took no stand. They certainly weren't going to defend a socialist government. Conservatives not going to do that. Heck, Roosevelt didn't do it. I mean, what's it to him? It's somewhere in Spain. What does he care? But Hitler and Mussolini did care. And Generalissimo Franco did, in fact, emerge victorious, did institute a repressive, authoritarian regime. And, of course, from the 70s on, Chevy Chase was right. He's still dead. But he was alive then. And in power, thanks to the intervention of Hitler and Mussolini and the lack of intervention on anybody else's side or for the other side by anybody else. Again, why would he oppose a freely elected socialist government if he's a socialist? Makes no sense. Now, some people would look at the pact that was signed before the Second World War between the German government and the Soviet Union as some sort of evidence that there was some commonality there. The only commonality is they both wanted to carve up Poland. One wanted one part, one wanted the other part, and basically, strategically, this avoided the two-front war, that there would be one side invading from the east and the other side invading from the west. You're not going to have that. That was the problem of the First World War. It was why there was something called the Schlieffen Plan, the belief that France could be defeated very quickly. The Russians would take longer to defeat, and they would take longer to mobilize. So if you take out the French really quick, then you could turn right around, and then you can put the bulk of your military against Russia, and then you can beat them both. They didn't take into account that the British would be involved at all. So signing a pact with Stalin had nothing to do with politics. It had to do with strategy, winning a war. And of course, once France was defeated in 1940, the operation to invade the Soviet Union, aka Operation Barbarossa, took place afterward. So he didn't go, well, we signed this pact with Stalin, we were going to honor it. He never honored any agreement he ever signed. He certainly didn't honor the one that most people, deride, which is the Peace in Our Time agreement to take over the Sudetenland of Czechoslovakia that he signed with Neville Chamberlain. That certainly, won't surprise you. Neville Chamberlain was a conservative, not a socialist. So he thought, we can talk to Hitler. We can make an agreement and, it will abide. Some people think maybe Chamberlain did this purely to give Britain a chance to arm themselves and be ready for war. And there is some merit to that concept. But the way that Chamberlain presented this undermines that point. And the fact that conservatives continually defended Hitler when he remilitarized the Rhineland, when he increased his armaments and ships in violation of the Versailles Treaty. Who were the people who said, well, he's got the right to do this, he should be allowed, and the Versailles Treaty was too harsh. Conservatives, not socialists, conservatives. So, given that, and given the essential promotion of the German Volk as an agent of German prosperity, you have to come to the conclusion that Adolf Hitler was not a leftist or a socialist or a democratic socialist of any kind. And I hope this has been informative and instructive. And if you have any questions, or if you would like me to recommend some books by, say, Sir Ian Kershaw, Belinda Davis, Robert Gilladley, there are a number of authors that I can recommend if you would like to read more about the topic and actually know factually what was going on, rather than listen to preachers, pundits, and politicians who want to make an argument of convenience that they think serves some kind of ideological cause. I am serving no cause other than my training, my education, that is, and my profession, because that is who I am. Thank you.